My parents sat at my own dining table and calmly announced that my brother and his fiancée were taking over my luxury lakefront villa. They told me to pack my bags and move into a tiny condo because my brother deserved my home more than I did. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply smiled, nodded, and waited for them to leave the house. The very next day, I packed everything I owned, canceled the lease, and handed the keys back to the landlord. When my family arrived that evening with a moving truck full of new furniture, every access gate flashed a security warning. By midnight, my father had called me 87 times begging for help while the police surrounded him. But before I tell you how I legally dismantled my toxic family in 48 hours, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to teach your family a hard lesson about boundaries. My name is Nia and I am 32 years old. I stood in the massive chef kitchen of my Lake Lanier villa, pulling a perfectly roasted turkey from the oven. The rich smell of rosemary and garlic filled the air, mingling with the expensive vanilla candles I had carefully placed around the house. This was my sanctuary. I paid $6,000 a month to lease this beautiful 5,000 square foot property overlooking the water. As the owner of a highly successful luxury real estate staging company in Atlanta, I had furnished the entire place myself. Every velvet sofa, every crystal chandelier, and every marble accent table belonged to my business. I had worked tirelessly to build a life of peace and elegance, but peace was never allowed when my family was around. I carried the heavy turkey to the dining room where my family was already seated around the custom mahogany table. The spread was immaculate. I had spent 2 days preparing candied yams, collard greens, baked macaroni and cheese, and homemade cornbread. My mother Brenda was holding court at the head of the table. She was 58 years old and the ultimate boy mom. In her eyes, the sun rose and set on my older brother Jamal. Jamal was 35 and sat next to her sipping premium bourbon that I had bought with my own hard-earned money. He called himself an entrepreneur, but in reality, he was a serial failure who relied on our parents to fund his lavish lifestyle. Beside him sat his fiancée, Tasha. Tasha was 30 years old, obsessed with social media, and determined to project a rich lifestyle that she absolutely could not afford. She sat there clutching a counterfeit designer handbag, acting as though she owned the place. At the other end of the table sat my father, Derek Sr. He was a traditional, domineering man of 60 who believed that family loyalty meant sacrificing everything for the men in the bloodline. I set the turkey down on the table and took my seat exhausted, but ready to enjoy the holiday. Before I could even pass the mashed potatoes, my mother clinked her fork against her crystal wine glass. She stood up smoothly, smoothing down her expensive dress that I had purchased for her birthday last month. "Family," she announced, her voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings of my home. "We have some wonderful news to share today. Jamal and Tasha have finally set a date for their wedding." I smiled genuinely. I was happy for my brother despite our vast differences and complicated history. "Congratulations, Jamal," I said warmly. "That is amazing news. I am so happy for both of you." Jamal flashed his signature charming smile, the exact same one he always used when he was about to ask someone for money. "Thank you, little sister," he said smoothly. "It is going to be the absolute wedding of the century. We are going all out." My father leaned back in his heavy dining chair and crossed his arms over his chest. He looked around my beautiful, meticulously decorated home with a smug expression that instantly made my stomach tighten with dread. "Which is exactly why we have made an executive family decision," my father said, his booming voice demanding total attention. "A man like Jamal is building a luxury clothing brand. He needs an environment that reflects absolute success, so he can attract high-level investors and business partners. Therefore, Jamal and Tasha are going to be moving into this villa by the end of the month." I froze completely. My hand stopped halfway to my water glass. The room suddenly felt suffocatingly hot. I looked at my brother, who was still grinning confidently, as if this was the most normal conversation in the world. I looked at Tasha, who was already running her manicured hands over the custom velvet chairs that I owned, inspecting them like she was shopping. "You are joking, right?" I asked, forcing a nervous laugh out of my dry throat. "I hold the lease on this property. I am the one who pays the rent." My father slammed his hand flat on the table, making the fine silverware rattle against the china plates. "I am not joking at all," he commanded, glaring at me. "You are a single woman. You work all the time. You do not need 5,000 square feet of space just for yourself. It is a complete waste of resources. You will pack your things by Sunday. You can find a nice little condo somewhere downtown. Your brother and his future wife deserve this place much more than you do. They are building a family and a legacy." Deserve. I repeated the word, tasting like pure poison in my mouth. "I pay the rent every single month, Dad. I paid the massive security deposit out of my own pocket. This is not some old family heirloom you can just hand down to the golden boy whenever you feel like it. I earned this house." Tasha scoffed loudly and rolled her eyes with exaggerated annoyance. She picked up her phone to check her reflection in the screen, completely unbothered by my distress. She adjusted her hair, making sure the cheap extensions were perfectly in place before looking at me with pure disdain. "See, this is exactly why you do not have a man," Tasha sneered. "You are too aggressive and difficult. Jamal is the king of this family. It is your job as his sister to support his vision. Do not be so bitter and jealous just because you are single and alone." The absolute audacity of this woman was blinding. She had not held a steady job in 3 years. Yet she felt perfectly comfortable sitting in the house I paid for, eating the food I cooked, and lecturing me about success and family duty. I opened my mouth to put her in her place, but my mother immediately rushed to defend them. "Tasha is absolutely right," my mother scolded, pointing an accusing finger at me across the table. "When Jamal gets his clothing line off the ground, he is going to take care of all of us. But right now, he needs this house to secure his future and project the right image. You are a strong black woman, Nia. You survived working 3 jobs in college. You know how to hustle and grind better than anyone I know. Jamal is a visionary. He is not built for the struggle like you are. He needs a soft place to land." I stared at my mother in absolute horror. She was actually using my past trauma and hard work as a weapon against me. She was calling me a strong black woman as a convenient excuse to treat me like a pack mule. It was the same toxic narrative I had been fed my entire life. "Built for the struggle." I fired back, my voice rising as years of suppressed resentment finally boiled over. "I was built for the struggle because you forced me into it. When I was 18 years old, you refused to co-sign my student loans because you said girls do not need expensive degrees. I had to clean office buildings at midnight, wait tables on the weekends, and do freelance design work just to pay my tuition. I survived on instant noodles and 4 hours of sleep for 4 entire years. I remember walking home in the freezing rain after my shifts because I could not even afford a bus pass. And what did you do for Jamal during that exact same time? You bought him a brand new luxury vehicle just for graduating high school with a terrible grade point average. You paid his rent for 5 years while he played around with cryptocurrency and lost everything. I did not struggle because I was built for it. I struggled because you threw me to the wolves while you treated him like absolute royalty." My father stood up quickly, his face red with unbridled fury. He pointed a shaking finger at my face. "I do not want to hear another disrespectful word out of your mouth," he yelled, his voice echoing loudly in the dining room. "You will clear out the master suite tomorrow morning. They need the extra space to store all the wedding registry gifts they will be receiving. This is a family decision and you will obey it. End of discussion." In the past, this is the exact moment where I would have broken down completely. I would have cried until my eyes were swollen and aching. I would have argued until my voice was completely gone, desperately begging them to see my value. I would have pleaded with them to recognize that I was worthy of the beautiful life I had painstakingly built for myself. But looking around that table, a profound shift happened within me. I finally saw the undeniable truth. I saw my father's cruel entitlement. I saw my mother's complete delusion. I saw my brother's insufferable greed and Tasha's shameless opportunism. They did not love me. They only loved what they could extract from me to make their own lives easier. Something inside my heart went entirely cold and completely silent. I stopped fighting. I took a deep, steadying breath, picked up my linen napkin, and gently wiped the corners of my mouth. You know what I said, pasting a serene and terrifyingly calm smile on my face. You are absolutely right. Jamal deserves exactly what he has earned. My mother beamed with absolute delight, clapping her hands together. See, I knew you would understand, baby, she said, clearly relieved that I was supposedly backing down. Family always comes first. I smiled even wider, fighting every urge to scream. I do understand, I replied softly. In fact, why do you not take Jamal and Tasha out to Buckhead tomorrow morning? You should take them luxury furniture shopping to celebrate the new house. They should pick out whatever they want. Jamal laughed out loud and raised his glass of premium bourbon toward me in a mocking toast. Thanks, little sister, he said confidently. It is good to see you finally knowing your place in this family. I picked up my water glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. Oh, I know my place, Jamal, I thought to myself as I watched them happily resume eating my food. But you are about to find out that you have no place at all. In the past, this is the exact moment where I would have broken down completely. I would have cried until my eyes were swollen and aching. I would have argued until my voice was completely gone, desperately begging them to see my value. I would have pleaded with them to recognize that I was worthy of the beautiful life I had painstakingly built for myself. But looking around that table, a profound shift happened within me. I finally saw the undeniable truth. I saw my father's cruel entitlement. I saw my mother's complete delusion. I saw my brother's insufferable greed and Tasha's shameless opportunism. They did not love me. They only loved what they could extract from me to make their own lives easier. Something inside my heart went entirely cold and completely silent. I stopped fighting. I took a deep, steadying breath, picked up my linen napkin and gently wiped the corners of my mouth. You know what I said, pasting a serene and terrifyingly calm smile on my face. You are absolutely right. Jamal deserves exactly what he has earned. Go take them furniture shopping tomorrow to celebrate. My sudden surrender seemed to catch them off guard for a mere fraction of a second, but their overwhelming greed quickly overpowered any lingering suspicion. My mother immediately began planning the logistics of the move. She excitedly clapped her hands, suggesting that Jamal and Tasha could take the master suite with the vaulted ceilings and the soaking tub, while my father insisted they turn my home office into a massive walk-in closet for Tasha and her cheap counterfeit bags. I just sat there chewing my roasted turkey, nodding in absolute agreement with every outrageous demand they made. I even offered to leave behind my custom Italian espresso machine, which made Tasha squeal with unearned delight. Jamal leaned back in my velvet dining chair, patting his stomach with a satisfied groan. You know, Nia, he said, pointing his silver fork directly at me. I am actually really proud of you right now. It takes a big person to admit when they are outmatched. You have always been so terribly stubborn, always trying to compete with me for attention. But handing over the house to your older brother, that shows real maturity. You are finally learning how to be a team player. I forced my smile to widen, fighting the intense physical urge to shatter my crystal wine glass against the edge of the mahogany table. A team player. That was absolutely hilarious, coming from a grown man who had never played on a team he did not actively sabotage. His smug voice immediately transported me back to a warm day in May over a decade ago. It was the day of my college graduation. I had graduated magna cum laude, finishing my extremely difficult degree a full year early while working multiple grueling jobs to pay my own way. I had proudly reserved front row seats for my family. I waited in the sweltering heat in my cap and gown, scanning the massive crowd for my parents. I called them 13 times. They never answered a single call. I walked across that stage completely alone, shaking the dean's hand while staring at 3 empty chairs in the front row. It was not until hours later, as I sat alone in a cheap roadside diner, eating celebratory pancakes by myself, that my mother finally texted me. They had driven to Miami instead. Jamal had booked a 20-minute gig as an amateur disc jockey at a rundown beach club, and my parents had dropped absolutely everything to go support his ridiculous dream. My mother had actually texted me, "You can get a degree anytime, Nia, but your brother is building a brand and he needs his family right now." I looked across my dining table at the exact same man who had stolen my graduation day. He was 35 now, still building that imaginary brand, still demanding that everyone sacrifice their important milestones to pave his road to nowhere. And my parents were still completely blind to the harsh reality of his failures. My father wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and chimed in. Your brother is right, Nia. It is about time you stopped being so selfish with your money. You have a good little business staging houses, but Jamal is destined for greatness. I is going to be the next big mogul in Atlanta. He needs this beautiful lakeside villa to host investors and throw networking parties. You staying here alone is just greedy. I nodded slowly, deliberately meeting my father's stern gaze. You are right, Dad. I said, making sure my voice was as smooth and sweet as honey. I have been entirely too selfish. Jamal absolutely needs this environment to show everyone exactly who he is. I will make sure the house is ready for him. Tasha practically vibrated with excitement in her seat. She was already scrolling through luxury furniture websites on her phone, completely ignoring the fact that she was currently sitting on thousands of dollars worth of inventory that belonged exclusively to my staging company. We should go to that high-end Italian showroom in Buckhead tomorrow morning, Tasha suggested, batting her false eyelashes at my father. I saw a beautiful modular sectional there last week. It is $20,000, but it would look absolutely perfect in the main living room. Plus, Jamal needs a proper executive desk for his new office. My father did not even flinch at the massive price tag. Done, my father declared confidently. I will bring my platinum card. We will make a whole day of it. We can get breakfast at that fancy spot you like, go shopping all afternoon and get everything sorted out. Naya, you will stay here and start packing your things. We expect you to be completely out by Sunday evening, so the new furniture can be delivered on Monday. I will get started first thing in the morning, I promised, without missing a beat. You should take your time shopping tomorrow. Really enjoy the day and treat yourselves. Do not rush back on my account. Packing an entire house is a lot of hard work, and I need complete silence and focus. My mother smiled approvingly, reaching across the table to pat my hand. That is my good girl, she said affectionately. It was the first time she had spoken to me with genuine warmth all evening, and it was entirely because I was actively agreeing to surrender my home. See how much better things are when you just listen to your parents. You will find a nice, modest apartment in the city. Maybe something close to your warehouse so you do not have to commute. It will be much more appropriate for a single woman like you. The dinner eventually wrapped up, and I stood to clear the heavy plates. Usually my mother would offer to help, or at least pretend to clean up the kitchen. But tonight she felt she had secured her ultimate victory. She retired to the living room with my father, Jamal, and Tasha. They sat on my imported Italian leather sofas, drinking my expensive wine, laughing loudly, as they planned the total takeover of my life. I carried the heavy stack of dirty dishes into the kitchen and turned on the faucet. The warm water washed over my hands as I scrubbed the plates, listening to their joyous conversation echoing down the hallway. I realized in that quiet moment of washing dishes that they truly believed I was weak. They mistook my profound silence for absolute submission. Because I had spent my entire life trying to earn their love, they assumed I would always fold under their immense pressure. They thought they could command me to hand over a luxury property that cost $6,000 a month just because we shared the exact same bloodline. They thought the word family was a magic spell that could instantly erase my strict boundaries, my hard work, and my self-respect. But the spell was permanently broken. I felt a profound sense of liberation washing over me, completely, replacing the decades of hurt and rejection. I did not feel like a tragic victim anymore. I felt like a master strategist. Through the kitchen doorway, I watched Jamal stand up and stretch his arms. Man, I am exhausted, he announced loudly. That turkey knocked me right out. What time are we heading to Buckhead tomorrow? My father checked his expensive gold watch. We will leave at 9 in the morning sharp, my father replied. We have a lot of ground to cover if we are going to furnish this entire villa by the end of the weekend. Tasha squealed again, wrapping her arms tightly around Jamal's neck. I cannot wait, she said. I am going to post so many updates on my social media. Everyone is going to be so incredibly jealous of our new house. 9 in the morning. I mentally locked the specific time into my brain. If they left at 9, taking the long drive down to Buckhead, having a leisurely brunch, and browsing massive furniture showrooms, I would have at least a 6-hour window before they returned to Lake Lanier. 6 hours was an absolute eternity for someone who ran a professional staging company. I washed the last dish, dried my hands on a fresh towel, and walked out into the living room to say goodnight to my ungrateful family. "Well, I am going to head to bed," I announced smoothly. "I have a very early start tomorrow. Lots of packing to do." My father nodded without bothering to look at me. "Make sure you clean the master bathroom thoroughly before you leave," he instructed coldly. "Tasha is very particular about cleanliness." I smiled brightly. "I will make sure the entire house is completely spotless," I promised. "You will not even know I was here." My mother blew me a kiss from the sofa. "Sleep well, Nia. Do not forget to leave the spare keys on the kitchen counter for Jamal." "I will take care of absolutely everything," I said. I turned and walked up the grand curving staircase to the master suite. As soon as I closed the heavy wooden door behind me, the compliant smile instantly dropped from my face. My heart was pounding a steady rhythmic drumbeat of pure adrenaline and absolute focus. I walked over to my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up my company directory. I needed my best crew for tomorrow. I needed the guys who moved extremely fast, asked absolutely no questions, and knew how to strip a massive house bare without leaving a single scratch on the walls. I drafted a mass text message to my lead foreman. "I need a full extraction crew at my personal residence tomorrow at 9:30 in the morning. 5 massive box trucks. We are stripping 5,000 square feet of luxury staging down to the baseboards. I will pay double the standard weekend rate. Be ready to move fast." My foreman replied within 60 seconds. "Consider it done, boss. See you tomorrow." I closed my laptop and let out a long, shaky breath. I walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my bedroom. Outside, the dark waters of Lake Lanier gently lapped against the private dock. It was a beautiful property. I had spent countless hours sitting on this very balcony drinking coffee, trying to convince myself that I had finally achieved enough to make my parents proud. I had thrown this lavish Thanksgiving dinner specifically to show them that their daughter was a monumental success. But success to them meant absolutely nothing if it was not actively serving Jamal. They did not want a successful daughter. They wanted a wealthy, obedient servant. I pulled my phone out and opened the email application. I found the direct contact information for my landlord, a wealthy real estate investor who frequently used my staging services for his other properties. We had a fantastic professional relationship. I began drafting a carefully worded email to him. I explained that due to an immediate and severe unforeseen family emergency, I needed to invoke the early termination clause in my residential lease. I acknowledged that I would forfeit my security deposit and owe a strict 2-month penalty fee, but I assured him the funds would be wired by noon tomorrow. I also informed him that the property would be completely vacated, professionally cleaned, and ready for a brand new tenant by sunset. I hit send without a single ounce of hesitation. The financial penalty was incredibly steep, but my ultimate peace of mind was truly priceless. It was a small price to pay to successfully amputate the toxic tumor of familial obligation that had been slowly killing my spirit for 32 years. I walked into my massive walk-in closet and pulled out a single black duffel bag. I began packing only my most essential personal items: my clothes, my jewelry, my important business documents. Everything else, the luxury beds, the massive televisions, the original artwork, the expensive Persian rugs, would go directly back into my company warehouse. As I folded my favorite sweaters, I could clearly hear my parents laughing downstairs. They were probably still celebrating their perceived glorious victory. They truly believed they had thoroughly conquered me. They truly believed they could march into my home, insult my entire life, demand my expensive property, and expect me to bow my head in humble gratitude. They thought my fake compliance was the ultimate undeniable proof of my utter weakness. They had absolutely no idea that they had just given me the perfect, undisturbed opportunity to orchestrate the most devastating exit strategy of my entire life. I finished packing my bag and set it neatly by the bedroom door. I looked around the lavish, beautifully decorated room one last time. By this exact time tomorrow, this room would be nothing but empty, echoing space and bare, painted walls. My family wanted my house. They wanted my hard-earned resources. They wanted me to disappear into a tiny, forgotten condo while they lived like absolute royalty on my personal dime. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to disappear completely. But I was taking absolutely everything with me. The next morning, I woke up before the sun even crested over the dark waters of Lake Lanier. I did not sleep much, but I felt more energized than I had in years. I stayed in my bedroom listening to the heavy footsteps of my family downstairs. They were moving with frantic excitement. I could hear my mother bustling around the kitchen, barking orders at my father to hurry up. Tasha was already talking loudly on her phone, boasting to one of her friends about how she was going to spend $20,000 on a single sectional sofa. Jamal was laughing, entirely oblivious to the reality that his luxurious new life was about to evaporate into thin air. I stayed out of sight until I heard the heavy front door slam shut. I walked to the top of the grand staircase and looked out the massive front window. My father's luxury sedan pulled out of the long driveway, heading straight toward Buckhead. They were gone. The house was completely silent. I checked my watch. It was exactly 9 in the morning. My window of opportunity had officially opened. I walked downstairs and unlocked the front gate. At exactly 9:30, the deep rumble of heavy diesel engines echoed down the quiet suburban street. 5 massive commercial box trucks pulled into the circular driveway bearing the logo of my real estate staging company. My lead foreman Darius jumped out of the first truck with a clipboard in his hand. He looked at the massive 5,000 square foot villa and then looked at me. "You really want everything out, boss?" he asked, his eyes scanning the luxurious setup. I nodded firmly. Every single piece of furniture, every rug, every painting, every artificial plant. I want this place stripped down to the bare hardwood floors and painted drywall. Leave nothing but the dust. Darius blew a sharp whistle and a crew of 20 professional movers swarmed into the house. Because I staged high-end properties for a living, my team knew how to dismantle a mansion with military precision. They wrapped the custom velvet dining chairs in protective plastic. They dismantled the imported Italian leather sofas. They unhooked the crystal chandeliers I had personally installed and safely packed away the massive flat-screen televisions. I stood in the center of the living room directing traffic and ensuring that nothing was damaged. Within 3 hours, the sprawling, opulent villa had been reduced to a hollow, echoing shell. Our footsteps bounced off the bare walls. The illusion of luxury was completely gone, leaving behind only empty rooms that mirrored the absolute emptiness of my family's promises. Once the trucks were loaded and sent back to my corporate warehouse, a professional cleaning crew arrived. I paid them a premium cash bonus to deep clean the entire property in record time. They scrubbed the floors, wiped down the granite countertops, and polished the floor-to-ceiling windows until the house looked like it had never been lived in. By 3 in the afternoon, the property was immaculate. I walked through the empty master suite where my mother had gleefully planned to put Jamal and Tasha. The room felt cold and hollow, completely stripped of its warmth and beauty. It was the perfect metaphor for what my family offered me. I pulled out my phone and called the property manager to confirm the electronic wire transfer for the lease cancellation penalty. He confirmed receipt of the funds and remotely deactivated my tenant profile. I gathered the physical spare keys, locked the front door for the very last time, and dropped the keys into the secure landlord drop box by the main gate. The lakeside villa was no longer my home. It was just a vacant property waiting for a new tenant. I got into my car and drove away from Lake Lanier without shedding a single tear. I merged onto the highway heading south toward the heart of Midtown Atlanta. My family believed I was a struggling woman who would gladly accept a cramped apartment to appease them. They had no idea about the secret life I had built. I pulled into the secure parking garage of a prestigious high-rise luxury building. The valet greeted me by name. I took the private elevator straight to the top floor. The doors opened directly into my personal penthouse. I had purchased this property 2 years ago using profits from my staging business. I kept it a complete secret from my parents and brother. I knew if they ever discovered I owned a penthouse, they would immediately demand a key and a permanent place in my sanctuary. They would have drained my resources and claimed my success as their own. But this space was entirely mine. The penthouse featured floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the Atlanta skyline. The walls were painted a calming sage green, the exact color my mother had forbidden me from painting my childhood bedroom. The furniture was sleek and perfectly tailored to my taste. There were no empty promises and no toxic expectations. I dropped my duffel bag on the bedroom rug, walked into the marble kitchen, and poured myself a glass of red wine. I walked out onto the private terrace and watched the sun set over the city. The cool evening breeze felt refreshing. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the rich flavor settle. I knew exactly what was happening miles away. My family was likely finishing a lavish dinner in Buckhead, laughing and toasting to their victory over me. They were probably loading a rented moving truck with whatever flashy furniture my father purchased on his credit cards. They were driving back to Lake Lanier, fully expecting to walk into a fully furnished luxury home that I was paying for. I placed my phone on the glass coffee table and waited. The trap had been perfectly set, and the jaws were about to snap shut. At exactly 7:45 in the evening, my phone screen lit up. The caller identification displayed my father's name. I simply watched it ring. The phone vibrated against the glass table, the harsh buzzing sound cutting through the peaceful silence of my penthouse. The call went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, my mother called, then Jamal called, then Tasha called. The phone began to light up like a frantic distress beacon. Call after call poured in an endless barrage of incoming panic. I sat comfortably on my velvet sofa, sipping my wine, watching the missed call notification counter climb higher and higher. 10 missed calls, 20 missed calls, 50 missed calls. By 8:30, the counter had reached 87 missed calls. I finally picked up the phone and opened my voicemail inbox. There were 14 new voice messages. I tapped the first one, put the phone on speaker, and set it back down on the table. My father's voice exploded through the speaker, breathless and confused. "Nia, where are you? The main gate code is not working. The digital keypad says access denied. We have a moving truck idling on the street and the neighbors are staring at us. Call me back right now." The message ended. I tapped the next voicemail. Jamal sounded furious. "Nia, stop playing these stupid games. I know you are in there. I can see the lights are off. Tasha is freezing. Open the damn gate before I climb over it and break the door down. You are embarrassing us." The third message was my mother, her voice trembling with absolute panic. "Nia, what is going on? We finally got past the main gate, but your front door code is deactivated. We looked through the windows and the house is totally empty. Where is the furniture? Where is the television? Where are my son's things? Answer your phone right now. You are acting psychotic." I listened to every voicemail with fascination. I could vividly picture the scene unfolding in the dark driveway of that massive empty house. I pictured my father stabbing his finger against a dead keypad. I pictured Jamal pacing back and forth, puffing out his chest to look tough while standing on a property he had no legal right to access. I pictured Tasha shivering, realizing the luxury lifestyle she bragged about on social media was a mirage. They were stranded in the dark with a truck full of furniture and nowhere to put it. They expected to walk into a fully paid luxury lifestyle, only to find a locked, vacant building that rejected their presence. My phone began to ring again. It was my father. He was calling for the 88th time. I took one final satisfying sip of my expensive red wine, gently cleared my throat, and calmly swiped the glowing green button to accept the incoming call. "Hello, Dad," I answered into the receiver, my voice steady, calm, and impossibly light. "Nia, where the hell are you?" my father screamed through the speaker of my phone. His voice was so loud and full of rage that I had to pull the device away from my ear. "I am standing right outside the front door. We have a massive truck full of brand new custom furniture sitting in the driveway, and the digital gate code is completely deactivated. I swear to God, you need to stop playing games and open this door right now. Jamal is freezing, and Tasha is getting upset." I took another slow sip of my red wine and looked out over the glittering skyline of Midtown Atlanta. The city lights sparkled below my penthouse balcony like a sea of diamonds. I felt absolutely no pity for the people shivering in the dark outside an empty house. I am not playing any games, Dad, I replied smoothly. I am simply doing exactly what you commanded me to do at the Thanksgiving dinner table yesterday. You told me to pack my things and get out of the house by Sunday. I decided to be proactive and leave a little bit early. I wanted to make sure the property was completely ready for the new king of the family. You should be thanking me for my incredible efficiency. Are you out of your mind? My father yelled. His breathing was heavy, and I could hear the wind howling in the background. Do not use that disrespectful tone with me. The electronic lock on the front door is flashing red. I looked through the glass panels, and the entire living room is completely empty. Where is the velvet sofa? Where is the television? Where did you put all the furniture? I chuckled softly. The sound of my laughter seemed to echo across the phone line, fueling his intense anger even further. I packed it all up and took it with me, I explained. Every single piece of furniture inside that villa belonged to my luxury staging company. Did you honestly think I was going to leave $50,000 worth of professional inventory behind just so your unemployed son and his delusional fiancée could live like royalty on my dime? I own those items, Dad. They are safely locked away in my corporate warehouse. You told me to pack my things, so I packed my things. I heard a loud scuffle on the other end of the line. The phone was snatched away, and my brother Jamal started yelling into the receiver. Nia, this is not funny, he barked, trying to sound authoritative and tough. We just spent $25,000 on a brand new modular sectional and a custom executive desk. We drove all the way back from Buckhead, and we are exhausted. Open the front door right now so the delivery guys can unload the truck. The delivery guys charge by the hour, and you are costing us a fortune. I leaned back into my plush sofa and smiled at the ceiling. I cannot open the door, Jamal, I said sweetly. I do not have the keys anymore. I called the landlord this morning and terminated my lease agreement. The property management company has already changed all the security codes. I paid a massive penalty to break my contract, but it was absolutely worth it. You do not have a house to move into, Jamal. You are standing outside a vacant property that belongs to a stranger. You are trespassing. The silence on the other end of the phone was absolutely deafening. I could practically hear the gears turning in their heads as the horrifying reality of the situation finally crashed down upon them. They had spent the entire day shopping with money they did not have, fully expecting to walk into a luxurious mansion that they did not earn. Now they were stranded in the freezing cold, next to a dark and empty house, with a truck full of furniture they had nowhere to put. You canceled the lease, my father finally whispered. His voice was no longer booming with arrogant authority. It was trembling with pure disbelief. You canceled the lease on a $6,000 a month property without consulting me first. I do not need to consult you about a contract that has my name on it, I reminded him firmly. I pay the bills, I make the rules. You wanted Jamal to have the house. Well, he can have it. He just needs to contact the landlord, pass a thorough credit check, provide proof of a steady income, and put down a $20,000 security deposit. Since he is such a successful entrepreneur, that should be incredibly easy for him. Right. I heard Tasha start to cry in the background. Her high-pitched wailing pierced through the phone speaker. Jamal, do something, she sobbed loudly. I am cold and my feet hurt. You promised me we were moving into a mansion today. You promised me a luxury lifestyle. I cannot sit in this freezing truck all night. Where are we going to sleep? My mother Brenda snatched the phone next. Her voice was shrill and frantic. Nia, how could you do this to your own flesh and blood, she cried out. We are your family. You left your brother out on the street like a common stray dog. This is not how a strong black woman behaves. You are supposed to uplift your family. You are supposed to protect your brother. You are acting like a bitter and jealous child. I felt a surge of righteous anger burning in my chest, but I refused to let her see me sweat. I am acting like a business owner who is protecting her assets, Mom, I said coldly. You sat at my table yesterday and told me I was built for the struggle. You told me I was a pack mule who was meant to carry the weight of this family while Jamal gets to rest. Well, I am officially retiring from that position. I am done struggling so that Jamal can pretend to be a king. I am done setting myself on fire just to keep all of you warm. But where are we supposed to go? My mother pleaded. Her manipulative tone had shifted from aggressive to pathetic. We already told the landlord at Jamal's old apartment that he was moving out. The new tenants already have the keys. We drove 2 hours to get here. The hotels in this area are completely booked because of the holiday weekend. Please, Nia, just give us the access code for tonight. We will figure everything out in the morning. Have some compassion for your family. I stood up and walked back out onto my private balcony. I looked down at the bustling city streets, feeling a profound sense of absolute peace. The cold wind whipped through my hair, but I felt perfectly warm. I do not have the access code, Mom, I repeated slowly, making sure every single word landed with maximum impact. I do not own the property. I do not lease the property. I have absolutely no legal right to grant you entry. If you try to force your way inside, the local police will arrest you for breaking and entering. I suggest you tell the moving truck driver to turn around and head back to the city. Maybe Jamal can use his visionary business skills to manifest a hotel room. Nia, please, my father begged, taking the phone back. His pride was completely shattered. We are freezing out here. You have to help us. You are my daughter. I am your daughter when it is convenient for you, I said softly. But yesterday, I was just an obstacle in Jamal's way. Have a wonderful night, Dad. Stay warm. I ended the call and immediately blocked all of their phone numbers. I walked back inside my beautiful penthouse, locked the sliding glass door, and poured myself another glass of wine. The heavy chains of family obligation were finally broken, and I was completely free. I sat on the couch and stared at the dark screen of my phone. I knew they were panicking out there in the cold night air. I knew my father was probably shouting at the moving guys, while my mother tried to console her precious golden boy. I knew Tasha was likely throwing a massive tantrum about her ruined social media posts. The incredible irony of the situation was almost overwhelming. They had blindly assumed I would just absorb their disrespect and quietly fund their extravagant dreams forever. They had mistaken my lifelong patience for a fundamental weakness. They genuinely thought the simple threat of their disapproval would keep me completely subdued and eternally loyal to their toxic system. But they were entirely wrong. I took another sip of my wine and felt a genuine, deeply satisfying smile spread across my face as I enjoyed my perfectly quiet night. "Hello, Dad," I answered into the receiver, my voice steady, calm, and impossibly light. My father did not waste a single second. He immediately launched into a booming lecture demanding that I stop this foolishness and give him the access code to the front door. He told me that I was embarrassing the family and that Jamal was losing his patience. I listened to his frantic voice echoing through my quiet penthouse, and I felt absolutely nothing but cold amusement. I told him once again that I did not have the code. I reminded him that I had officially terminated my lease and handed the property back to the owner. "I am no longer a resident at that address, Dad," I explained slowly, making sure he heard every single syllable. "You are standing on private property that does not belong to you, and you need to leave before the neighbors call the police." My father scoffed loudly through the speaker. He told me I was bluffing. He insisted that I was just trying to teach them a lesson and that I needed to drop the act before he lost his temper completely. In the background, I could hear Jamal pacing furiously across the paved driveway. Jamal was trying to show off for Tasha, acting like the big man in charge. He was shouting about how he was not going to let his little sister humiliate him in front of his future wife. He yelled that he was going to get inside that house no matter what it took. I heard Tasha cheering him on, telling him that he was the king of the castle and that he needed to handle his business. The sheer entitlement was absolutely staggering. They genuinely believed that the rules of society simply did not apply to them, because my mother had spent 35 years convincing Jamal that he was untouchable. I heard the heavy clanking of metal through the phone. Jamal had marched over to my father's luxury sedan and popped the trunk open. My father asked him what he was doing, but Jamal completely ignored him. He grabbed a heavy metal tire iron from the emergency toolkit. He announced to my parents and his cheering fiancée that he was going to walk around to the back patio and smash the glass door. He told them he would just let them all in through the front once he gained access. He figured he would just bully me into paying for the broken glass later. That was his entire strategy for life. Make a huge mess and force me to clean it up and pay for all the damages. I spoke clearly into the phone. Dad, if Jamal breaks that glass, he is committing a serious felony. Stop him right now or he will go to jail. My mother snatched the phone from my father and screamed at me. Do not you dare threaten your brother, Nia, she yelled. He is just trying to get his family out of the freezing cold because you abandoned us. This is all your fault. If you had just obeyed your father, we would not have to break a window. You forced him to do this to survive. I realized then that there was absolutely no reasoning with a woman who worshipped her son to the point of pure delusion. She was literally blaming me for Jamal choosing to vandalize a multi-million-dollar property. I did not say another word to her. I simply hung up the phone, walked over to my kitchen island, and poured myself a fresh glass of water. I knew exactly what was about to happen next. The Lake Lanier neighborhood was an exclusive, highly secure community. The houses were spaced out, but the residents were incredibly wealthy, deeply observant, and highly suspicious of any loud noises or strange vehicles parked outside in the dark. A massive moving truck idling on the street, combined with an angry man smashing a glass door with a tire iron, was a guaranteed recipe for immediate disaster. Sure enough, less than 15 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was not my father or my mother. The caller identification displayed the official number for the local county police precinct. I cleared my throat and answered professionally. A stern, deep voice greeted me. He identified himself as Sergeant Miller from the local precinct. He asked if he was speaking to Nia Caldwell, the current leaseholder of the lakefront property. I remained perfectly calm and respectful. I informed the sergeant that I was indeed Nia Caldwell, but I clarified that I was no longer the leaseholder. I explained that I had officially terminated my lease that very morning, paid all my penalties, removed all my belongings, and surrendered the property back to the management company. Sergeant Miller sounded slightly surprised, but remained highly professional. He explained that several concerned neighbors had called emergency services to report a suspicious moving truck parked on the street. The neighbors also reported seeing a man walking around the back of the vacant property with a metal weapon. The sergeant asked me if I was expecting any deliveries, or if I had authorized anyone to be on the premises tonight. This was the defining moment. This was the exact moment I could have stepped in, made a convenient excuse, and shielded my toxic family from the severe consequences of their own reckless actions. I could have easily told the police it was just a family misunderstanding, but doing that would mean stepping right back into my lifelong role as the family pack mule. It would mean taking full responsibility for Jamal and his violent, entitled behavior once again. I refused to do it. I took a slow breath and spoke the absolute truth. Officer, I have no idea who is at that property, I said clearly. The house should be completely empty and secured. I have not authorized anyone to be there, and I do not have any scheduled deliveries. If someone is trying to break in, they are trespassing on private property, and they do not have my permission to be there. Sergeant Miller thanked me for my time and cooperation. He told me they had multiple patrol units arriving on the scene right now and ended the call. I set my phone down and closed my eyes, letting the immense gravity of my decision wash over me. I had just handed my golden child brother over to the justice system. For my entire life, my parents had demanded that I throw myself in front of every incoming train to save Jamal. Tonight, I simply stepped out of the way and let the train hit him head-on. I walked back out to my balcony and imagined the chaotic scene unfolding at the lake house. Within minutes, the quiet, upscale neighborhood was completely illuminated by flashing red and blue police lights. At least 4 patrol cars swarmed the driveway, blocking the moving truck from leaving. Officers jumped out with their flashlights shining directly on my parents. Jamal was caught red-handed standing on the back patio with the metal tire iron still in his grip. The shattered glass from the patio door surrounded his expensive designer shoes. He tried to talk his way out of it, using his usual arrogant charm, but the police were not interested in his excuses. They commanded him to drop the weapon and step away from the broken door. When Jamal tried to argue that the house belonged to his sister, the officers quickly informed him that the former tenant had already confirmed the property was vacant and unauthorized. My mother screamed in absolute horror as the police firmly grabbed Jamal, pinned his arms behind his back, and placed him in cold metal handcuffs. She ran toward the officers, crying and begging them to stop yelling that her son was a successful entrepreneur and a good man. My father had to physically hold her back to prevent her from getting arrested for interfering with a police investigation. Tasha stood by the moving truck, completely mortified, hiding her face from the wealthy neighbors who had all stepped out onto their manicured lawns to watch the incredible spectacle. The sheer humiliation of the moment was absolutely devastating for my parents. They had driven to this luxury neighborhood, expecting to gloat, expecting to claim a magnificent mansion, expecting to look down on everyone around them. They were standing in the freezing cold, surrounded by armed police officers, watching their precious golden child being stuffed into the back of a squad car for breaking and entering. My phone started ringing frantically again. It was Tasha calling me from her cell phone. I ignored it. Then my father called again. I ignored that too. I sat on my plush velvet sofa feeling an overwhelming sense of vindication. Jamal was finally experiencing the real-world consequences of his own entitlement. My parents were finally realizing that they could not bully their way into a property they did not own. The illusion of their perfect superior family was completely shattered in front of an entire neighborhood of elite residents. The police hauled Jamal away to the county jail, leaving my parents and Tasha stranded in the driveway with a moving truck they now had to pay for and absolutely nowhere to sleep. They had viciously pushed me out of my very own home, and now they were the ones left entirely alone out in the freezing bitter cold on this dark tonight. The morning sun streamed through the expansive glass windows of my luxurious high-rise penthouse, gently waking me from the most peaceful and uninterrupted sleep I had experienced in my entire adult life. I stretched my arms above my head, feeling a profound sense of absolute lightness. I walked into my pristine marble kitchen, brewed a fresh cup of dark espresso, using the custom Italian machine I had successfully rescued from my greedy family, and sat down at the kitchen island to check my smartphone. I had kept my parents and my brother completely blocked from contacting me. However, I had intentionally left my social media accounts fully active and accessible. I knew Tasha would not be able to resist the overwhelming urge to broadcast her newly manufactured victimhood to the entire world. I opened my Instagram application, and there it was, right at the top of my feed. Tasha had gone live in the middle of the freezing night, and the chaotic video had already been downloaded, stitched, and wildly reposted across multiple platforms, gaining massive digital traction within our local Atlanta community. I tapped the glowing screen and watched the absolute spectacle unfold before me. Tasha was sitting in the passenger seat of the rented commercial moving truck, shivering dramatically in her thin designer jacket. Her dark mascara was intentionally smeared under her eyes to make it look like she had been crying for hours. Jamal was pacing angrily in the background, yelling aggressively into his cell phone, while the red and blue police lights continued to flash brilliantly across the dark, empty windows of my former lakeside villa. "Look at what my evil, jealous sister-in-law just did to us," Tasha wailed into the camera, dabbing at her dry eyes. She aggressively waved a crumpled tissue at the camera lens. "We were supposed to move into our beautiful new dream house today, to start our family. Jamal and I are getting married, and she is so incredibly bitter that she is completely single and alone. She deliberately led us to believe we had a place to live, waited until we spent all our money on gorgeous new furniture, and then she canceled the lease behind our backs. She threw us out onto the street in the freezing cold. We are literally homeless right now because she is jealous." She wailed that I simply could not handle seeing my older brother happy and successful. The video was an absolute masterclass in psychological manipulation and pure delusion. Tasha carefully omitted the crucial fact that the house legally belonged to me. She conveniently forgot to mention that my parents had forcefully ordered me to vacate my own property to serve her selfish needs. She completely left out the part where my brother had violently grabbed a heavy metal tire iron to smash through a glass door, which was the actual reason the police were currently swarming the property. She simply painted herself as the innocent, persecuted bride-to-be and painted me as the bitter, unstable villain who had snapped out of pure jealousy. I scrolled slowly through the thousands of comments flooding the video. People from our local community, extended family members, and complete strangers were furiously tearing my character apart. They called me every vicious name imaginable. They typed massive paragraphs about how toxic and evil I was, claiming that I was a massive disgrace to my community and a terrible representation of a supportive sister. Tasha replied to several top comments online. She played the graceful victim, perfectly thanking people for their urgent prayers and setting up a digital cash link so her followers could donate money to help them secure a new place to stay. She was actually monetizing the chaos they had created. I felt a brief familiar flutter of deep anxiety in my chest. For my entire life, my family had expertly weaponized public opinion to force my absolute compliance. But as I watched Tasha fake another loud sob for the camera, the anxiety completely vanished, instantly replaced by a cold, sharpened focus. I was calm. I was not the scared little girl anymore. Let them talk. The internet's outrage meant absolutely nothing to my actual reality. However, my mother decided to violently escalate the situation far beyond simple social media gossip. Around 10 in the morning, my mobile phone rang loudly. It was an incoming call from Marcus Jenkins, one of my top corporate clients. He was a prominent luxury real estate developer who routinely contracted my staging company to furnish his multi-million-dollar properties before they hit the market. He was a strictly business-oriented man, so this was unusual. A phone call from him on a holiday weekend was highly irregular. I answered the call professionally. "Good morning, Marcus," I said smoothly. "Is everything all right with the Buckhead Estate project?" "Nia," he began, his voice sounding incredibly awkward and deeply hesitant. "I am so sorry to bother you on a weekend, but I just received a very disturbing phone call at my office. Someone claiming to be your mother said you are having a mental health crisis and making false accusations against family members. She told my assistant that your business is currently failing today. She aggressively claimed that you are acting dangerously erratic and that you might not be capable of fulfilling your contractual obligations for the upcoming showcase." The sheer vindictiveness of my mother's actions momentarily stole the breath right out of my lungs. She was not just trying to embarrass me online, she was actively trying to destroy my entire livelihood. She knew that my real estate staging business relied heavily on my flawless reputation for reliability and elite professionalism. By contacting my top developers and planting the seed that I was suffering from a massive mental breakdown entirely, she was attempting to systematically dismantle my primary source of income. She desperately wanted to starve me out financially so that I would have absolutely no choice but to come crawling back to the family begging for their forgiveness. I took a deep, centering breath and maintained my completely professional tone over the phone line. "I deeply apologize for the bizarre interruption to your morning, Marcus," I replied calmly. "My mother and I are currently experiencing a severe personal estrangement due to her aggressively attempting to misappropriate my financial assets. I assure you that my business thrives. My team is fully operational, and our staging installation for your property will proceed exactly as scheduled on Tuesday morning. I have absolute control over my company." Marcus let out a loud, audible sigh of deep relief. "Thank God," he chuckled softly. "I figured it was something exactly like that. I have worked with you for 3 years, Nia, and you are the most reliable contractor I have. Families can be incredibly difficult when money is involved. I will instruct my reception team to permanently block her number. We are still on for Tuesday." I thanked him. After I ended the call with Marcus, I sat in the quiet luxury of my penthouse, shaking my head at the absolute absurdity of my mother's desperate tactics. This malicious smear campaign was not a new strategy for her. It perfectly mirrored the exact same psychological warfare she had waged against me when I was in my early 20s. I vividly remembered the year I had finally managed to save $10,000 after working grueling hours at 3 different jobs. I was planning to use the funds to officially register my staging business and buy trucks. Jamal, meanwhile, had decided he was going to start a luxury sneaker brand. He had demanded that I hand over my entire savings to fund his initial inventory. When I looked him in the eye and firmly refused, my mother had unleashed a holy war against me. She did not just yell at me in the privacy of our home. She went straight to our massive mega-church congregation in Atlanta. She stood in front of the women's ministry group, clutching a laced handkerchief, and wept uncontrollably. She told the entire congregation that I was deeply rebellious. She claimed I was hopelessly selfish and actively turning my back on the holy teachings about family unity. She painted a tragic picture of a loving mother, mourning the spiritual downfall of her disobedient daughter. For months after that incident, church members would pull me aside after Sunday service, looking at me with deep disappointment and sorrowful pity. The older women would place their hands on my shoulders and offer unsolicited prayers for my hardened heart. They would tell me that I needed to repent and honor my parents by supporting my brother financially. The immense social pressure had been utterly suffocating. I had surrendered my spirit. The constant whispers eventually broke my resolve. I emptied my hard-earned savings account, handed every single dollar over to Jamal. His brand quickly failed. The money vanished into nothing. I shook the bitter memory of that old church incident out of my mind and focused entirely on the present moment. My mother had clearly decided to play her absolute dirtiest cards to ruin my corporate reputation. She thought dragging my staging business through the mud would leave me completely destitute and begging for her eventual forgiveness. She vastly underestimated the solid professional relationships I had spent the last 5 years building from the ground up. Meanwhile, my deeply toxic family was currently dealing with the severe, immediate consequences of their own incredibly arrogant actions. Jamal had spent the entire night sitting inside a freezing cold holding cell at the local county jail. My parents were utterly frantic. They were stranded with a moving truck full of expensive furniture they could not return, and a humiliated fiancé who was demanding immediate answers. Tasha had proudly broadcasted their entire moving day on her social media platforms, creating a massive digital footprint of their supposed new luxury lifestyle. Now they were functionally homeless and publicly humiliated. My parents knew they could not possibly go back to their wealthy church friends and admit they had nowhere to sleep. They needed to bail my golden child brother out of jail immediately, and they desperately needed to rent a luxury short-term property to save face. They needed to maintain the elaborate illusion that they were a deeply successful, untouchable family. But creating that specific illusion required a massive amount of liquid cash, something my father did not currently have access to. My father had already maxed out his premium credit cards buying Jamal that ridiculous $20,000 modular sectional sofa and the custom executive desk. The moving truck deposit had drained whatever was left in his primary checking account. He was backed into a very tight financial corner with absolutely no breathing room. That was when his manipulative, controlling brain remembered a tiny, crucial detail from my past. When I was exactly 18 years old and preparing to leave for college, my father had marched me into a local retail bank branch. He forced me to open a joint checking account with him. He claimed it was strictly for emergency situations, arguing that as the head of the household, he needed total oversight of my finances to ensure I was being responsible. In reality, it was just another toxic mechanism to monitor my spending and maintain strict absolute control over my emerging independence. Over the past 14 years, I had completely transitioned my personal finances to different banking institutions. However, that original joint account still technically existed, and my father's name was still legally attached to the primary account charter. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and my father had never respected my financial boundaries anyway. Early that Saturday morning, as soon as the bank doors opened to the public, my father walked straight up to the teller desk. He presented his identification and requested a massive immediate withdrawal from that specific joint account. He confidently drained exactly $25,000 in a single sweeping transaction. He took the cash, fully intending to use my hard-earned money to post bail for Jamal and secure an overpriced luxury property for the weekend. He wanted to fix the massive problem I had supposedly created by simply stealing the solution directly out of my pocket. Less than 10 minutes after the transaction was completed, my cell phone vibrated on the kitchen island. I looked down at the bright screen and saw a new text message from my father. I had blocked his main phone number the night before, but he was using my mother's cell phone to reach me. I slowly read the short, incredibly arrogant message he had proudly typed out. He wrote, "I just withdrew the funds from your old account. Consider this strict financial reparations for the severe embarrassment and emotional distress you caused your older brother last night. We will be staying at a premium estate downtown while we figure out our next move. Do not ever try to disrespect the men in this family again." I stared at the text message glowing brightly on my phone screen. A normal person would have panicked entirely. A normal person would have screamed out loud, called the bank in a furious rage, or started hyperventilating over the sudden and shocking loss of $25,000. But I did not panic at all. I did not shed a single tear or feel my heart rate increase. Instead, I set my phone down on the smooth marble countertop and let out a long, highly amused chuckle that echoed warmly through my quiet penthouse. My father truly believed he had outsmarted me. I thought he had successfully executed a brilliant power move that would leave me financially crippled and emotionally devastated. He assumed I was just a naive little girl who had foolishly left a massive pile of money sitting around in an old forgotten personal checking account. But my father lacked vital information about the intricate ways I managed my growing business empire. He had no idea how thoroughly I had protected myself and elevated my professional standing over the last few years. What my arrogant father completely failed to understand was that my business had expanded exponentially over the last 12 months. As my luxury staging company grew, I needed to drastically restructure my corporate finances to handle large incoming vendor payments and complex tax obligations. 3 months ago, I had intentionally met with my brilliant corporate accountant and my primary business banker to reorganize all my financial assets. During that intensive restructuring process, my banker had advised me to maintain a clean, active holding account for clearing massive operational expenses. Instead of opening an entirely new account and paying unnecessary administrative fees, I had simply repurposed that exact same legacy joint account. I had officially and legally linked that specific checking account directly to my staging company, Limited Liability Corporation. It was no longer a simple personal checking account for a young college student. It was now an official operational holding account registered under the strict legal umbrella of my corporate entity. The $25,000 sitting in that account did not belong to Nia Caldwell, the individual person. That money legally belonged to a registered corporate entity in the state of Georgia. Those funds were specifically earmarked to pay my commercial warehouse lease, compensate my hard-working moving crew, and purchase high-end staging inventory from my international suppliers. My father thought he was just teaching his disobedient daughter a harsh lesson about family loyalty and financial control. He thought he was taking money from a weak, vulnerable family member who would never have the courage to fight back against her own flesh and blood. He was entirely wrong. By walking into that bank and intentionally draining $25,000 from that specific operational account to pay for his son to get out of jail. My father had not just stolen from me. He had knowingly and deliberately stolen a massive amount of capital directly from a registered commercial business. He had crossed a very severe, very permanent legal line that extended far beyond normal toxic family drama. Taking funds from a corporate entity for entirely unauthorized personal use is not a simple civil dispute or a minor family disagreement. Under the strict financial laws of our state, withdrawing large sums of money from a commercial business account without executive authorization to fund personal lifestyle expenses constitutes severe criminal activity. My father had just cheerfully handed me the absolute perfect weapon to destroy his entire pristine reputation. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my beautiful penthouse and looked down at the busy city streets below. I felt an incredible rush of pure, unadulterated power flowing through my veins. For 32 years, this man had used his financial leverage and his demanding authority to make me feel small, insignificant, and completely trapped. He had enabled my brother terrible behavior, actively encouraged my mother delusions, and demanded my constant financial submission. Now, in his desperate attempt to save his precious golden child and maintain his fake wealthy image, he had walked blindly into an inescapable legal trap. I picked up my phone and opened my contacts list. I did not text him back. I did not call him to scream or beg or negotiate. I simply scrolled past his name and clicked on the contact card for my lead corporate attorney. I tapped the screen to initiate the call, listening to the steady ringing sound, knowing that the ultimate reckoning for my family was finally about to begin. My father wanted to treat me like a disposable financial asset, but he was about to discover the severe consequences of robbing a determined woman. The legal trap was completely set and ready. I smiled brightly in the empty room and pressed call. The line rang twice before my corporate attorney answered. His name was David, and he was known throughout Atlanta as a ruthless legal bulldog who specialized in corporate litigation and asset protection. I had retained his services 2 years ago when my business first crossed the seven-figure revenue mark. David was practically family to me, far more protective of my well-being than my actual blood relatives had ever been. "Good morning, Nia," David answered briskly, his tone strictly professional but warm. "To what do I owe the pleasure of a phone call on a holiday weekend?" I took a deep breath and looked out over the sprawling city. "David," I replied calmly, "I need to report a massive unauthorized withdrawal from my primary operational holding account. Someone just walked into a local branch and manually drained $25,000 of corporate funds." I heard David sharply inhale on the other end of the line. The casual warmth in his voice immediately vanished, replaced by a razor-sharp legal focus. "Are you absolutely certain, Nia?" he asked, the sound of a keyboard clacking loudly in the background. "Was your business debit card compromised, or was this a direct wire transfer?" "It was a direct in-person withdrawal," I explained, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "The person who took the money is my father, Derek Caldwell Sr. He was originally listed on this specific legacy account 14 years ago when I was a college student. However, as you know, we completely restructured that account 3 months ago and placed it firmly under the legal protection of my limited liability corporation. My father just used his outdated access to steal $25,000 of corporate capital to fund his personal lifestyle expenses." David went completely silent for a few seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was laced with pure disbelief. "Nia, your father just committed federal wire fraud," David stated flatly. "By moving those protected corporate funds across banking lines for unauthorized personal use, he crossed a severe criminal threshold. He did not just steal from his daughter, he successfully defrauded a registered business entity." "I know," I said softly. "And I want to press full charges. I want you to initiate the maximum legal response immediately." I could practically hear David nodding through the phone. "I am contacting the bank fraud department right now," he said quickly. "We are going to place an immediate hard freeze on all of his personal accounts to track where those stolen corporate funds were transferred. Once the bank verifies the unauthorized corporate breach, they are legally obligated to contact federal authorities. Your father is about to have a very terrible afternoon." I thanked David for his swift action and ended the call. I walked into my pristine kitchen and poured myself a tall glass of sparkling water. I felt no guilt. I felt no remorse. For my entire life, my parents had demanded my absolute obedience and my constant financial sacrifice. My father had brazenly taken $25,000 of my hard-earned money simply because he felt entitled to punish me for not giving my home to my brother. He thought he was untouchable. I was about to learn that corporate law does not care about family loyalty. Within 45 minutes, the bank fraud department completely locked down my father's financial profile. Every credit card, every savings account, and every checking account associated with his social security number was frozen solid. The bank investigators quickly traced the stolen $25,000. My father had immediately wired the money to a luxury short-term rental agency to secure a massive mansion in downtown Atlanta for the weekend, and he had used the rest to pay a local bail bondsman to get Jamal out of the county jail. By early afternoon, the consequences of his extreme arrogance finally caught up to him. Jamal had been released from jail, and the family had retreated to the overpriced luxury rental they had secured with my stolen money. I could perfectly imagine the scene inside that glamorous house. Tasha was probably lounging by the heated pool, posting fake updates on social media about their incredible resilience. My mother was likely cooking a lavish lunch coddling Jamal and telling him how unfair the police had been to him. My father was undoubtedly pacing the living room, feeling like the ultimate provider because he had successfully outsmarted his rebellious daughter. Their false sense of victory was violently shattered around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. 3 unmarked black vehicles pulled directly into the sweeping circular driveway of their luxury rental. 5 individuals wearing dark suits and carrying official badges stepped out of the cars and marched straight up to the heavy front doors. They were not local street cops responding to a simple noise complaint. They were seasoned financial crime detectives working in tandem with federal investigators. They pounded loudly on the front door, demanding immediate entry. My father confidently opened the door for the expensive lunch they had just ordered. Instead, he was met by a grim-faced lead detective who immediately asked to speak with Derek Caldwell Sr. regarding a severe case of corporate financial fraud. The confident, arrogant expression on my father's face instantly vanished. The detectives pushed past him and entered the spacious living room, flashing their heavy metal badges. Jamal jumped up from the designer sofa, his bravado completely disappearing the moment he saw law enforcement officers walking into the house for the second time in less than 24 hours. My mother screamed, dropping a glass plate onto the kitchen floor, the loud, shattering noise echoing through the massive rental property. Tasha immediately stopped recording her social media videos and hid her phone, terrified that she was somehow going to be arrested next. The lead detective coldly informed my father that the bank had flagged his morning withdrawal as a major fraudulent transaction. The detective explained that the checking account he had drained was legally classified as a commercial holding account belonging to an active limited liability corporation. My father stammered, his face turning an unhealthy shade of pale gray. He desperately tried to explain that I was his daughter, that it was a simple family misunderstanding, and that he was perfectly entitled to that money because his name was originally on the ancient account charter. The detective did not care about his pathetic excuses. The detective sharply informed him that stealing $25,000 from a business entity to pay for a vacation rental and a bail bondsman was a textbook definition of felony wire fraud. The detective warned my father that because the amount exceeded a specific financial threshold, the case was being automatically escalated. My father's legs gave out, and he collapsed heavily into a nearby accent chair, his breathing turning incredibly shallow as the devastating reality of a lengthy federal prison sentence finally washed over his arrogant mind. While the detectives interrogated my trembling father in the massive living room, my phone buzzed loudly on my kitchen island. It was my mother calling me from yet another random unknown number. I swiped the screen to answer, putting the phone on speaker. "Nia, please." My mother shrieked, her voice completely hysterical and drowning in absolute terror. "You have to stop this right now. There are federal detectives in our living room. They are talking about putting your father in federal prison for wire fraud. You have to call the bank and tell them it was just a mistake. Tell them you gave him full permission to take the money." I remained perfectly still, listening to her desperate sobs. The woman who had proudly called me a complete failure, who had demanded I surrender my luxury home, was now begging for her life. "Nia, please," she cried out again, her voice cracking. "Have mercy on your own flesh and blood. He is your father. You cannot do this to your own family." I stared out the window, watching a commercial airplane fly high across the bright blue Atlanta sky. I felt absolutely no pity for the people who had tried to maliciously destroy my entire peaceful existence. I leaned much closer to the phone microphone and spoke with a chilling, unwavering, and beautifully serene calmness. "I am not doing anything to you, Mom," I replied coldly. "I am simply letting you experience the severe consequences of your own actions. You told me yesterday that Jamal was not built for the struggle and that I needed to be a team player. Well, Dad stole from my company, and now he has to pay the price. I am just being realistic, Mom." I ended the phone call immediately. I blocked the new number, smiled warmly, poured more wine, and walked away from the toxic drama forever to enjoy my absolute peace and quiet today, without any single hesitation at all whatsoever. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of new messages on my phone. The tone of the communication from my family had drastically shifted overnight. There were no more arrogant commands or furious threats. The crushing reality of federal wire fraud had finally broken their delusion. My father sent me a lengthy, incredibly formal text message. Nia, he wrote, we urgently need to speak with you regarding the terrible misunderstanding that occurred yesterday. Jamal and I would like to formally apologize for any stress we may have inadvertently caused you. We have reserved a private booth at the Capitol Grill in Buckhead for lunch today at 1 o'clock. Please meet us there so we can resolve this unfortunate family dispute like rational adults. I stared at the message, reading it 3 times to fully absorb the absolute absurdity of his words. He was calling a federal crime an unfortunate family dispute. He was still trying to downplay the fact that he had stolen $25,000 of corporate funds. He wanted to sit down at a high-end steakhouse, likely using my stolen money to pay for the meal, and politely convince me to drop the felony charges that were currently destroying his life. I called my corporate attorney, David, and read the text message out loud to him. David let out a sharp, cynical laugh. They are terrified, Nia, David explained. The federal investigators have already confiscated your father's passport and frozen every single financial asset attached to his name. They know that if you refuse to cooperate with their narrative, your father is going to spend the next 5 to 10 years in a federal penitentiary. They want to ambush you in a public place where you cannot make a huge scene, and they are going to try to intimidate you into signing away your legal rights. I strongly advise against going. I thought about David's warning. It was the smart, safe, logical advice. But a deep, unyielding part of my soul needed to see this through to the very end. I needed to look them in the eye and watch them finally realize that I was no longer the obedient pack mule they had relied on for 32 years. I am going to go, David, I decided firmly. I want to see exactly what kind of desperate lies they have fabricated to save themselves. David sighed heavily, but understood my determination. Fine, he agreed. But do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. Record the entire conversation. Georgia is a one-party consent state, so you are perfectly within your legal rights to record them without their knowledge. If they try to hand you any legal documents, you take them, stand up, and walk directly out of the restaurant. We will review them together. I agreed to his terms, dressed in a sharp, impeccably tailored emerald green power suit, and drove my sleek black SUV toward Buckhead. I felt a tremendous sense of powerful anticipation. I was not walking into an ambush. I was walking into a complete and total victory. I arrived at the Capitol Grill exactly at 1 o'clock. The hostess immediately guided me toward a secluded, dimly lit private dining room at the very back of the luxurious restaurant. The heavy mahogany door was closed. I took a deep breath, adjusted my posture to project absolute authority, and pushed the door open. My father and Jamal were seated at a large circular table covered in crisp white linen. They both looked incredibly haggard and deeply exhausted, wearing wrinkled dress shirts and dark circles under their bloodshot eyes. They had clearly spent the entire night panicking about their catastrophic legal situation. However, they were not alone. Seated between my father and my brother was a man I did not recognize. He was wearing a cheap, shiny gray suit that looked completely out of place in the elegant restaurant. He had slicked back hair and a greasy, arrogant smile. I instantly recognized the type. He was a low-level, aggressive defense attorney they had likely hired using whatever desperate cash they could scrape together. "Ah, Nia," my father said, standing up quickly with a strained, highly unnatural smile. "Thank you so much for coming. Please sit down. Let us get you something to drink." I did not return his fake smile. I remained standing near the door, my arms crossed firmly over my chest. "I prefer to stand," I replied coldly. "Who is the sir sitting at our private family lunch, Dad?" The greasy man in the gray suit stood up and confidently extended his hand toward me. I did not take it. He awkwardly lowered his hand and cleared his throat. "Miss Caldwell," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "My name is Gregory Vance. I am legal counsel for your father and your brother. We invited you here today to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution to the current misunderstanding regarding your shared banking account." I stared at him, absolutely unblinking. "It is not a shared banking account, Mr. Vance," I corrected sharply. "It is an operational corporate holding account registered to my limited liability company." My father committed federal wire fraud. There is absolutely no misunderstanding to resolve. Gregory Vance let out a patronizing chuckle and gestured for me to sit down again. Now, Nia, let us not use such aggressive terminology, he said smoothly. Your father simply withdrew funds from an account that still legally bears his name. While we acknowledge that the corporate restructuring creates a slight administrative complication, we believe that bringing federal investigators into a simple family dispute is a massive overreaction that will only cause unnecessary emotional damage to everyone involved. My brother Jamal leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the white tablecloth. He looked at me with that same entitled, infuriating smirk he always wore when he expected me to clean up his massive messes. Come on, Nia, Jamal said, his tone casual and dripping with absolute arrogance. You know Dad did not mean to steal from your business. He was just trying to help me out of a tight spot because you decided to throw a massive temper tantrum and lock us out of the lake house. You have always been the pack mule of this family. It is your job to carry the heavy load when things get difficult. You have plenty of money. $25,000 is nothing to you. Just call the bank, tell them you authorize the withdrawal, and let us all move on from this stupid drama. I stared at my brother in absolute profound disbelief. Even while staring down the barrel of a federal criminal investigation, he still fundamentally believed that I existed solely to serve his needs. He truly believed that I was obligated to commit perjury and lie to federal agents just to protect his precious lifestyle. You are genuinely delusional, Jamal, I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. You want me to lie to federal investigators. You want me to risk my own business license and my corporate standing to protect the man who stole from me just so you can rent a luxury mansion you do not deserve. That is never going to happen. My father slammed his fist against the table, his fake polite facade completely shattering. The heavy silverware clattered loudly against the expensive china. You will do exactly as you are told. Nia, my father bellowed, his face turning an angry shade of purple. You are going to call those detectives and tell them you gave me permission to take that money. I am your father. I raised you. I put a roof over your head. You owe me your absolute loyalty. Gregory Vance quickly held up his hands, trying to calm my furious father down. He reached into his cheap leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He slid them across the smooth mahogany table toward me. Miss Caldwell Gregory said, his voice dropping into a threatening register. We have prepared a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and a civil settlement contract. If you sign these documents today, you will officially drop all fraud charges against your father. You will retract your statements to the bank. In exchange, your family will agree not to pursue civil litigation against you for the severe emotional distress you caused by illegally locking them out of the residential property yesterday. I looked down at the ridiculous stack of papers. The sheer audacity of their demands was almost comical. They were trying to intimidate me into dropping federal charges by threatening me with a completely baseless civil lawsuit. But then I noticed a second document underneath the non-disclosure agreement. I pulled it out and read the bold heading. It was a corporate profit-sharing agreement. What exactly is this? I asked, holding the paper up for them to see. Jamal leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, looking incredibly satisfied with himself. That is a profit-sharing contract, Jamal explained confidently. Since you clearly have so much disposable income running through your staging business, Dad and I decided it is only fair that you share the wealth with the rest of the family. If you want us to forgive you for embarrassing us last night, you are going to sign that contract. It guarantees that 20% of your company annual net profits will be deposited directly into my new business account to help me launch my luxury clothing brand. It is the least you can do after ruining my moving day. I stood in the quiet private dining room, looking at the three men sitting across from me. They had stolen $25,000 from my business, triggered a massive federal investigation, and their brilliant solution was to demand that I surrender 20% of my entire corporate empire to avoid a fake lawsuit. They truly believed I was that weak. They truly believed that their aggressive intimidation tactics would force me into total submission. I did not argue with them. I did not yell or scream or cry. I simply reached into the pocket of my emerald green blazer and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen, stopped the active voice recording that had been running since I walked into the room, and saved the audio file directly to my secure cloud server. I smiled a cold, triumphant smile and looked directly into my father's terrified eyes. "Thank you, gentlemen," I said softly. "You just gave me everything I needed." The absolute silence that fell over the private dining room was deafening. I slowly lowered my smartphone and slipped it back into the pocket of my emerald green blazer. My father stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and growing terror. Jamal just blinked, unable to comprehend that his brilliant master plan had completely unraveled in a matter of seconds. But Gregory Vance, the cheap, aggressive defense attorney they had hired, understood exactly what I had just done. The greasy, confident smirk instantly vanished from his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. He stared at my pocket as if I had just placed a live grenade on the white tablecloth. "What do you mean?" my father demanded, his voice dropping into a harsh whisper. "What did you just do with your phone, Nia?" I smiled warmly at him. "I just recorded every single word that was spoken in this room over the last 15 minutes, Dad," I explained with perfect clarity. "I recorded Mr. Vance offering to drop a fabricated civil lawsuit in exchange for my silence on a federal wire fraud investigation. I recorded Jamal admitting that he wants 20% of my corporate profits to fund his imaginary clothing brand. And I recorded you trying to intimidate a key witness in an active federal investigation." "You cannot do that," Jamal scoffed, crossing his arms and leaning back in his chair. "That is totally illegal. You cannot record us without our permission. I will just call the police and have you arrested." I let out a soft, highly amused laugh. "You really should read a book sometime, Jamal," I replied. "We live in the state of Georgia. Georgia is a one-party consent state. That means as long as one person involved in the conversation consents to being recorded, the audio is completely legal and entirely admissible in a court of law. Since I consented to recording my own conversation, I did not need your permission at all." I turned my attention to the sweating attorney sitting between them. "Furthermore, Mr. Vance," I said, my voice hardening into a sharp, commanding tone, "you are a licensed attorney in this state. You know exactly what you just participated in. Demanding 20% of a corporate entity under the direct threat of a baseless civil lawsuit specifically to cover up a felony wire fraud charge is the textbook legal definition of extortion and blackmail. You just conspired to commit federal extortion on a recorded line, and that audio file is already safely uploaded to my secure corporate cloud server." Gregory Vance turned the color of old ash. A thick bead of sweat rolled down his forehead. He knew I was absolutely right. He had walked into this restaurant expecting to bully a scared, obedient daughter into signing away her rights. He had not expected to face a seasoned corporate chief executive officer who understood the law better than he did. He realized in that exact moment that his entire legal career, his license to practice law, and his own personal freedom were in severe jeopardy. Vance did not say a single word to my father or my brother. He scrambled out of his chair so fast that it nearly tipped over backward. He frantically grabbed his cheap leather briefcase and started shoving the extortion documents inside with trembling hands. "Gregory, what are you doing?" my father asked, his voice rising in panic as he watched his only legal defense preparing to flee. "You need to make her delete that recording right now. Tell her to delete it." "I cannot represent you," Derek Vance stammered, completely ignoring my father's demands. His eyes darted nervously toward the heavy mahogany door. "I was hired to facilitate a standard family mediation. I was not informed that you were actively attempting to extort a federal witness. I am formally withdrawing as your legal counsel effective immediately. Do not ever contact my office again." Vance practically sprinted across the private dining room. He yanked the heavy wooden door open and bolted down the restaurant hallway, abandoning my father and my brother to face the devastating consequences of their own actions. The door swung shut behind him with a heavy thud, leaving the three of us completely alone. My father looked utterly broken. The arrogant patriarch who had demanded my absolute submission just 24 hours ago was now sitting frozen in his chair, realizing his life was entirely over. But Jamal reacted differently. Jamal had never been told no in his entire 35 years of existence. My mother had spent decades buffering him from every single consequence, convincing him that he was a victim whenever the world did not bow at his feet. Seeing his cheap lawyer run away, realizing he was not getting a cut of my company profits, and knowing he was likely heading back to a jail cell pushed his fragile ego past the breaking point. "You selfish, ungrateful witch!" Jamal roared, his face contorting into a mask of pure, violent rage. He slammed his fist down on the dining table, making the expensive crystal glasses jump and clatter. "You are supposed to help me. I am your older brother. You owe me that money. You have always been the pack mule of this family, and it is your job to fix this." I looked him dead in the eye, perfectly calm. "I do not owe you anything, Jamal," I said coldly. "You are a 35-year-old failure who throws temper tantrums when women refuse to fund your lifestyle. You are going to prison, and I am going to watch it happen." Something inside Jamal completely snapped. He let out a furious guttural scream and lunged directly across the large circular table toward me. He blindly swiped his arms, completely destroying the elegant table setting. The crisp white linen tablecloth bunched up violently. Expensive wine glasses shattered against the hardwood floor. Silverware went flying across the room. He reached across the center of the table, his hands grasping wildly toward my neck. I stepped back quickly, easily avoiding his clumsy, unhinged attack. Jamal lost his balance, slipping on the slick fabric of the tablecloth, and crashed hard onto the polished wooden floor amidst the broken glass and spilled water. The massive commotion immediately drew the attention of the restaurant staff. The heavy mahogany door burst open, and three large, highly trained security guards rushed into the private dining room. The security guards immediately assessed the violent scene. They saw my brother thrashing on the floor amidst the shattered crystals, screaming obscenities at me, while my father sat frozen in shock. Two of the guards swiftly grabbed Jamal by his arms, hauling him to his feet and firmly pinning his wrists behind his back. Jamal thrashed against their grip, still yelling that I was a terrible sister and that I was ruining his life. The third guard stepped in front of me, creating a physical barrier of protection. "Are you harmed, ma'am?" the security guard asked me respectfully. I smoothed down the lapels of my emerald green blazer and shook my head. "I am perfectly fine," I replied clearly. "But that man just attempted to physically assault me after trying to extort my business. I would like you to call the Atlanta Police Department immediately, and I would like a copy of the security footage from the hallway cameras showing him being restrained." My father finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. "Nia, please do not do this." My father begged, tears actually forming in his eyes, as the security guards dragged my screaming brother out of the private dining room. "Please, he already has a breaking and entering charge from last night. If you call the police for assault, they will revoke his bail. He will go straight back to jail." I looked down at the man who had stolen $25,000 from me just a few hours ago. "He will be exactly where he belongs, Dad," I said coldly. "And you should start preparing yourself because you will be joining him very soon." I walked out of the Capitol Grill with my head held high, leaving my father alone in the ruined dining room to pay for the broken glasses. The police arrived shortly after, took my official statement, and hauled Jamal directly back to the county jail for assault and violating the terms of his previous bail release. The very next morning, I walked into the Fulton County Courthouse, alongside my corporate attorney, David. We bypassed the standard family drama and went straight to the judge chambers. I presented the clear, undeniable evidence. I provided the audio recording of Jamal attempting to extort my business profits. I provided the official police report from the restaurant incident. I provided the sworn statements from the security guards who had to physically restrain him from attacking me. The judge did not hesitate for a single second. I was immediately granted a permanent ironclad restraining order against my brother Jamal Caldwell. The legal parameters of the restraining order were incredibly strict. Jamal was legally barred from coming within 500 feet of my physical person. He was banned from approaching my luxury penthouse in Midtown. Most importantly, he was permanently prohibited from stepping foot anywhere near my commercial staging warehouse, my corporate offices, or any of my active job sites across the city of Atlanta. If he so much as sent me a text message or liked a photo on my social media accounts, he would be instantly arrested for violating a protective order. I walked out of the courthouse feeling an immense, heavy burden lift from my shoulders. The toxic, suffocating cord that had tied me to my brother, abusive parasitic behavior, was finally severed by the swift blade of the law. He could no longer rely on my mother emotional manipulation to force me into submission. He could no longer use physical intimidation to get his way. He was completely locked out of my life, entirely blocked from my financial resources, and totally isolated from my hard-earned success. The golden child had finally fallen, and I was exactly where I belonged, completely untouchable and entirely free. The restraining order was not just a piece of paper to me. It was the ultimate declaration of my profound independence. For my entire life, my family had operated under the incredibly toxic delusion that blood ties excused all forms of abuse. They believed that because we shared the same parents, Jamal was inherently entitled to my space, my money, and my peace of mind. The legal system had just officially notified them that their twisted family rules were completely invalid in the real world. I handed a certified copy of the restraining order to David, who placed it securely in his leather briefcase. "We are going to serve this to his public defender this afternoon," David said with a sharp, satisfied smile. "Jamal is going to be sitting in a cold holding cell when he finds out that he can never legally approach you again. Your father is currently meeting with his own court-appointed lawyer right now. The federal prosecutors are not offering him any leniency on the wire fraud charges. The walls are closing in on them, Nia. You played this absolutely perfectly." I thanked David for his unwavering support and walked down the courthouse steps into the bright Atlanta sunlight. My phone was completely quiet. There were no demanding text messages from my father. There were no hysterical, guilt-tripping voicemails from my mother. There were no arrogant threats from my brother. My aggressive, unapologetic enforcement of my own personal boundaries had finally silenced them. I got into my sleek black sports utility vehicle, started the engine, and drove toward my corporate warehouse to meet my staging team. I had a multi-million-dollar property to stage in Buckhead tomorrow, and I refused to let my family's self-inflicted misery distract me from my continued professional success. I had survived their final ambush, turned their own trap against them, and secured my absolute safety. I was completely ready for the final act. The legal machinery I had set in motion moved with an absolutely terrifying speed and precision that completely obliterated my family's remaining arrogance. The Fulton County Prosecutor's Office did not see a harmless family misunderstanding. They saw a clear-cut, thoroughly documented case of felony wire fraud involving the unlawful transfer of corporate assets. My father, Derek Caldwell Sr., the man who had spent his entire life demanding total submission and absolute loyalty from his children, was suddenly forced to confront a legal system that did not care about his traditional patriarchal authority. Within 48 hours of his arrest, my father stood before a federal judge for his initial arraignment. His court-appointed defense attorney, vastly inferior to the corporate lawyers my father had always assumed he could afford, desperately tried to negotiate a plea deal to keep him out of federal prison. The evidence against my father was entirely insurmountable. The bank records clearly showed the unauthorized transfer. The corporate charter proved the funds belonged to my limited liability company. And my recorded audio file from the restaurant ambush explicitly demonstrated his aggressive attempt to extort a federal witness, to completely avoid a lengthy prison sentence that would have undoubtedly destroyed him. My father was forced to swallow every last ounce of his overwhelming pride and accept a brutal plea agreement. He formally pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of criminal financial fraud. The judge, clearly disgusted by my father's blatant exploitation of his own daughter, handed down a severe sentence. My father avoided active prison time, but he was sentenced to 5 years of strict probation, mandated to complete 1,000 hours of community service, and ordered to pay full and immediate financial restitution to my corporation. But the real devastation came in the form of the massive financial penalties. To cover the mandatory restitution, the exorbitant legal fees, and the crippling federal fines, my father had to completely liquidate his entire retirement savings. The comfortable, wealthy future he had always envisioned for himself was instantly wiped out. He was 60 years old and completely broke. While my father was dealing with the catastrophic collapse of his entire life, Tasha decided to launch her own deeply misguided counterattack. Tasha had spent the last 2 weeks watching her carefully curated social media empire completely disintegrate. Her viral video crying in the moving truck had backfired spectacularly. The local Atlanta community had quickly discovered the actual truth behind the eviction, thanks to my corporate attorney quietly leaking the police report and the facts regarding the lease termination to a prominent local news outlet. Tasha went from being the tragic, homeless bride-to-be to the laughingstock of the city. People mercilessly mocked her fake designer bags and her delusional entitlement. Her social media followers abandoned her, and local businesses refused to sponsor her content. Furious and desperate to regain control of the narrative, Tasha hired a low-rent civil attorney and officially filed a frivolous lawsuit against me. She attempted to sue me for intentional infliction of emotional distress, claiming that my sudden lease cancellation had caused her profound psychological trauma, severe public humiliation, and extreme financial hardship. She demanded $100,000 in compensatory damages, completely convinced that she could use the civil court system to bully me into paying for the lifestyle she still believed she deserved. I did not even blink when I received the summons. I handed the lawsuit directly to David, my corporate attorney, who simply laughed out loud in his office. "This is absolutely adorable, Nia," David said, tossing the lawsuit onto his massive mahogany desk. "She is trying to sue you for legally terminating your own lease. We are going to completely obliterate this in court." The civil hearing was scheduled 3 weeks later. I arrived at the courthouse wearing a sharp, custom-tailored navy blue suit, projecting absolute confidence. Tasha arrived wearing an inappropriate, overly flashy dress, clutching Jamal's arm tightly as they walked into the courtroom. She glared at me from across the aisle, completely confident that the judge would sympathize with her tragic story. But the judge was an older, extremely stern woman who had absolutely no patience for frivolous litigation. Tasha's attorney stumbled through his opening statement, attempting to argue that I had maliciously orchestrated the eviction to cause maximum emotional damage to his client. He cited Tasha's viral video as proof of her intense suffering. The judge listened for exactly 3 minutes before she held up her hand and sharply interrupted him. "Counsel," the judge said, her voice dripping with sheer exasperation. "Are you honestly standing in my courtroom arguing that your client is entitled to financial compensation because the defendant legally chose to terminate a residential lease that was entirely in her own name?" Tasha's attorney stammered, attempting to pivot his weak argument. "Your Honor, we are arguing the malicious intent behind the action." The suddenness of the cancellation left my client homeless. The judge scoffed loudly. "It is not the defendant's legal responsibility to provide housing for an adult woman who is not on the lease agreement. The defendant followed the legal protocols for early termination and paid the required penalties. Your client's emotional distress stems from her own lack of financial planning, not from any illegal action taken by the defendant." David stood up smoothly and addressed the court. "Your Honor, we have submitted documentation proving that my client, Nia Caldwell, faced severe emotional and financial abuse from her family, culminating in her father stealing $25,000 from her corporate account. My client terminated the lease to protect her assets and escape a highly toxic environment. Furthermore, we are requesting that this lawsuit be dismissed immediately with prejudice, and we are filing a motion for the plaintiff to cover all of my client's legal fees associated with this entirely frivolous action." The judge did not hesitate. She slammed her wooden gavel down hard. "Lawsuit dismissed with prejudice," the judge announced firmly. "And I am granting the defense's motion for legal fees. Miss Tasha, you will be responsible for covering the entire cost of the defendant's legal representation today. Do not ever waste this court's time again." Tasha gasped out loud, her face turning an incredibly bright shade of red. She had expected to walk out of that courtroom with a massive settlement check. Instead, she was walking out saddled with thousands of dollars in new legal debt. Jamal looked utterly defeated, staring blankly at the floor. He had truly believed Tasha's lawsuit was going to be their golden ticket out of poverty. I walked out of the courtroom feeling an overwhelming sense of profound justice. The legal system had systematically dismantled every single lie and every single manipulation my family had attempted to use against me. The protective walls I had built around my life were completely impenetrable. But my family's incredible arrogance was a deeply ingrained disease that refused to die easily. Despite the crushing legal defeats, the permanent restraining order, and the massive financial ruin, my father now faced Jamal, and my parents were still desperately obsessed with maintaining the fake illusion of extreme wealth. They absolutely could not accept the fact that they had been publicly humiliated in front of their entire Atlanta social circle. They needed to prove to everyone, and most importantly to me, that they were still the dominant, successful family they had always pretended to be. They needed a massive public victory to salvage their shattered egos. A month after the disastrous civil lawsuit, my family decided to execute what they believed was their ultimate comeback strategy. Jamal using Tasha's remaining credit, and my father scraping together the very last remnants of his depleted savings, signed a lease on a breathtaking ultra-modern mansion in the exclusive Buckhead neighborhood. It was a massive, sprawling property with floor-to-ceiling glass walls, a huge infinity pool, and a custom chef's kitchen. It was significantly larger and much more expensive than the Lake Lanier villa they had originally tried to steal from me. They signed an ironclad 2-year lease agreement through a prominent corporate property management group, committing to an astronomical rent of $8,500 every single month. The moment they received the keys, they launched a massive, highly coordinated social media campaign to flaunt their new lifestyle. Jamal posted an incredibly arrogant house tour video on Instagram, showing off the massive master suite and the luxurious pool. He stood in the expansive living room wearing a fake designer suit, holding a glass of cheap champagne. "God always blesses the righteous," Jamal announced smugly to the camera. "We faced some incredibly toxic negativity recently, but true kings always bounce back stronger. We upgraded to an even better mansion. Some people tried to tear us down, but they just made us elevate." Tasha posted dozens of photos, carefully tagging the exclusive Buckhead location, making sure to highlight the expensive finishes and the sprawling square footage. My mother even got involved, sharing the video on her own Facebook page with a passive-aggressive caption about how God always protects the faithful and punishes the wicked. They specifically made sure their posts were visible to my professional network, desperately hoping the news of their massive upgrade would eventually reach me and crush my spirit. They truly believed they had finally won. They believed they had successfully proven that they did not need my money, my houses, or my support to live a lavish elite lifestyle. They were completely convinced they had staged the ultimate glorious comeback. They had absolutely no idea that their massive, arrogant victory was actually the final devastating trap I had perfectly set for them. My family honestly believed that they could casually sign a multi-year residential lease agreement, post a heavily filtered home tour video on their public social media platforms, and aggressively mock me from the safety of their brand new, pristine Buckhead mansion. They firmly believed that moving into an $8,500 a month luxury property would conclusively prove to the entire Atlanta social elite that my father's criminal conviction was absolutely nothing but a minor, completely temporary setback. They desperately needed the entire world to see that the Caldwell family name still commanded absolute power, immense respect, and unlimited financial resources. The profound irony of their incredible arrogance was that they were blindly digging their own financial graves, using a very shiny, very expensive shovel that I had personally handed to them. I had spent the past 3 weeks quietly finalizing the legal acquisition of the very property they had just rented. Using the massive financial savings I secured by legally terminating the Lake Lanier lease, combined with a highly strategic withdrawal from my staging company, Operational Profits, I had successfully purchased the Buckhead mansion through a completely anonymous, newly formed limited liability holding company. I had intentionally engaged an elite, highly discreet commercial property management firm to handle the daily operations and strict tenant screening processes. I gave them one extremely specific, uncompromising directive. When Derek Caldwell Sr. and his son Jamal submit a residential application, you will approve them immediately regardless of their depleted credit scores, provided they sign an ironclad, unbreakable 2-year lease agreement with 0 early termination clauses. They walked directly into my snare without asking a single question. 3 weeks after they moved into my house, the Fulton County Court scheduled a final mandatory family mediation session to officially finalize the strict terms of my father's financial restitution payments. I arrived at the courthouse wearing a sophisticated, tailored, cream-colored suit, projecting absolute, unwavering serenity. David, my exceptional corporate attorney, walked beside me carrying a heavy leather briefcase containing the final strike. My father and Jamal arrived looking incredibly smug, clearly emboldened by their new luxurious living situation. They were flanked by a new, expensive defense attorney they had somehow managed to afford. Tasha, though not legally required to be there, had insisted on tagging along wearing a bright, flashy dress and carrying another counterfeit designer handbag. She glared at me as we all sat down around the large wooden conference table, her expression dripping with unwarranted superiority. The court-appointed mediator, a stern, no-nonsense professional named Mr. Harrison, initiated the proceedings by reviewing the strict conditions of my father's federal plea agreement. The primary agenda item was establishing a rigid, non-negotiable monthly payment schedule to fully restore the $25,000 he had illegally stolen from my corporate holding account, plus an additional $15,000 in mandatory legal fees and court-imposed financial penalties. My father's new defense attorney cleared his throat and confidently leaned forward. Mr. Harrison, my client, has recently secured a highly lucrative consulting position that provides a substantial steady income. However, considering his newly established significant residential expenses, we formally request a lenient extended repayment plan structured over a 5-year period. Paying a massive monthly restitution amount would place an undue, unfair financial hardship on his ability to maintain his current stable housing situation. My brother Jamal scoffed loudly and crossed his arms over his chest. "Yeah," Nia, Jamal added arrogantly, completely ignoring the professional decorum of the mediation room. "You really need to back off and give Dad some breathing room. We just signed an incredibly strict 2-year lease on a massive, beautiful mansion in Buckhead. The rent is $8,500 a month. We are living in absolute luxury while you are still playing real estate games. You have plenty of money. You can afford to wait a few years for your little refund." Tasha smirked and pulled out her smartphone, clearly eager to show off the house tour video she had posted online. "We are doing incredibly well without you, Nia," Tasha chimed in, her voice shrill and dripping with fake sweetness. "God always blesses the righteous. You tried to destroy us, but we elevated to a level you could never even dream of reaching. You should really check my Instagram feed. The infinity pool is absolutely stunning." I did not raise my voice. I did not match their aggressive, arrogant energy. I simply turned my head and looked directly at David. David smiled, a sharp, predatory smile, opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a single, neatly folded document. He slid it precisely across the smooth wooden conference table, stopping exactly in front of my father's new defense attorney. The attorney picked up the document, adjusted his reading glasses, and began scanning the dense legal text. Within 5 seconds, all the color completely drained from his face. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically between the document, my father, and me. "What is that?" my father demanded, sensing the sudden drastic shift in his attorney demeanor. "Is she trying to file another ridiculous lawsuit against us?" The defense attorney slowly placed the document back down on the table. His hands were visibly trembling. Derek, the attorney, whispered, his voice incredibly strained and tight. "This is a certified, notarized property deed for the residential mansion located in Buckhead. The exact property you and Jamal just signed a 2-year lease for." My father frowned, clearly not comprehending the severity of the situation. "Okay, and what does that mean? Why does she have the deed to our rental house?" David leaned forward, steepling his fingers together on the table. "It means," David explained with chilling clarity, "that the anonymous limited liability holding company that currently owns your new luxury residence is entirely controlled and operated by Nia Caldwell. The elite property management group you signed your lease with is a direct subsidiary of her corporate enterprise." My father's mouth fell completely open. He stared at me, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated horror. Jamal physically recoiled in his chair as if he had just been struck by lightning. Tasha dropped her smartphone onto the table, the screen shattering with a loud, sharp crack. I smiled warmly at my utterly devastated family. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, maintaining intense, unblinking eye contact with my father. "You wanted to live like a king, Dad," I said softly, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any mercy. "You wanted to prove to the entire city of Atlanta that you were untouchable, that your golden child son deserved a mansion, and that I was nothing but a minor inconvenience. So I decided to give you exactly what you desperately wanted. I let you sign a legally binding, completely ironclad 2-year lease agreement. I let you commit yourself to paying $8,500 every single month. And you will be paying every single cent of that exorbitant rent directly into my corporate bank account." Jamal jumped up from his chair, his face turning an angry, violent shade of red. "This is illegal!" Jamal screamed, completely losing control of his fragile emotions. "You cannot be our landlord. This is an elaborate setup. You planned this just to humiliate us. We are breaking the lease right now. We are moving out today." I did not even flinch. I kept my eyes locked on my father. Actually, Jamal David intervened smoothly, tapping a specific clause highlighted in yellow on the document. "The lease agreement you both eagerly signed contains a zero tolerance, zero exemption early termination clause. If you attempt to break the lease, or if you fail to pay the rent on the first of every month, you are legally responsible for paying the entire remaining balance of the 2-year contract in full immediately. That is exactly $204,000. Furthermore, since your father is currently under federal probation for criminal wire fraud, a civil eviction, or a massive financial default will be reported directly to his federal probation officer. It will be considered a severe violation of his release conditions." The defense attorney nodded grimly, confirming David's absolute legal authority. "He is right, Derek. If you default on this lease, the management company will file an immediate eviction notice, and your probation officer will likely recommend revoking your supervised release. You will be sent directly to federal prison to serve out the remainder of your suspended sentence." The heavy, crushing reality of their situation finally collapsed onto them like a concrete wall. They had intentionally locked themselves into an inescapable financial prison of their own making. They were legally bound to pay their despised, supposedly failure of a daughter, $8,500 a month, just to keep a roof over their heads and keep my father out of a federal penitentiary. They were entirely funding the massive corporate empire they had continuously mocked and tried to destroy. I stood up smoothly from the conference table, smoothing the crisp lapels of my cream-colored suit. "Mr. Harrison," I said politely, addressing the stunned court-appointed mediator. "The defense requested a lenient restitution payment plan. Given that they have voluntarily committed to an $8,500 a month luxury lease, they clearly possess significant undisclosed financial resources. Therefore, I respectfully decline their request for an extended payment plan. I demand the full restitution payment within 30 days, as originally mandated by the federal judge." Mr. Harrison nodded firmly, typing the strict conditions into his official report. "Agreed. The full restitution amount is due within 30 days. If payment is not received, the court will issue an immediate warrant for violation of probation." I picked up my designer handbag and turned to walk out of the mediation room. I stopped briefly at the door and looked back at my utterly broken family. My father was staring vacantly at the table, his entire arrogant spirit completely crushed. Jamal was burying his face in his hands, realizing he was entirely trapped. "Enjoy the new infinity pool, Tasha," I said sweetly, flashing her a brilliant, triumphant smile. "And do not forget, rent is due on the 1st. Late fees are strictly enforced." I walked out of the courthouse and stepped into the warm Atlanta sunlight. The heavy, toxic chains of my family's relentless abuse were permanently shattered. I had successfully transformed their insatiable greed and their blinding arrogance into the ultimate highly profitable weapon, and I was finally completely and permanently free. The immediate aftermath of the mediation hearing sent a massive shockwave through my family's fragile financial house of cards. They were now legally trapped in a devastating reality of their own creation. My father, completely stripped of his retirement savings and facing the strict, unyielding conditions of his federal probation, was forced to confront a world where his former arrogant authority meant absolutely nothing. He had to accept a humiliating low-level administrative position at a logistics company just to scrape together his portion of the mandated restitution. My mother, Brenda, who had spent decades acting like an untouchable suburban queen, was forced to swallow her immense pride and take a job as a part-time receptionist at a local real estate office. The irony of her answering phones for an industry I currently dominated was not lost on either of us. They were both working well past their expected retirement age, exhausting themselves every single day, just to barely survive the crushing financial weight of the $8,500 a month lease they had so proudly signed. Every single month without fail, they had to transfer those exorbitant funds directly into my corporate bank account. They were literally paying me to keep a roof over their heads entirely broken by their own insatiable greed and blinding arrogance. For Jamal and Tasha, the consequences were even more dramatic and immediate. Tasha had spent her entire engagement actively curating an incredibly fake, ultra-luxurious lifestyle on her social media platforms. She had fully believed that marrying into the Caldwell family would provide her with unlimited access to generational wealth and effortless elite status. The devastating revelation at the mediation hearing completely destroyed her carefully constructed fantasy. She suddenly realized that Jamal was not a brilliant, misunderstood entrepreneur. He was a deeply broke, 35-year-old serial failure who was entirely dependent on a father who was now a convicted federal felon. Worse, she realized that the breathtaking Buckhead mansion she had been endlessly bragging about online was actually owned by the very same sister-in-law she had viciously mocked and attempted to sue. Tasha was utterly humiliated. The very next day, she quietly packed all of her counterfeit designer bags, left her sparkling diamond engagement ring on the custom kitchen counter, and completely vanished from the property. She canceled the wedding without a single word of warning, leaving Jamal entirely alone in the massive echoing house. Jamal completely stripped of his golden child status, abandoned by his image-obsessed fiancé, and facing a mountain of insurmountable legal debt, finally experienced the harsh, unfiltered reality of the world without my financial safety net to catch his fall. I sat peacefully on the sprawling terrace of my luxury penthouse, watching the golden hour sun slowly set over the vibrant Atlanta skyline. The air was crisp and incredibly clear. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, feeling an overwhelming sense of profound, unshakable serenity. For 32 years, I had been suffocating under the crushing, toxic weight of my family's impossible expectations. I had allowed them to convince me that my sole purpose in life was to serve as their reliable pack mule. I had genuinely believed the destructive lie that being a strong black woman meant constantly setting myself on fire, just to keep my abusive, ungrateful family warm. They had relentlessly weaponized my strength, my loyalty, and my hard work against me, demanding that I sacrifice my own happiness, my own home, and my own financial security to build a soft, luxurious landing pad for my brother's endless string of failures. But I had finally broken that vicious generational curse. I had completely dismantled the deeply ingrained toxic narrative that demanded my silent suffering. I had learned the most valuable and difficult lesson of my entire life. True family is not defined by shared blood, and loyalty should never require the complete sacrifice of your own self-respect. Setting firm, unyielding boundaries is not an act of cruelty or selfishness. It is a necessary, vital act of profound self-preservation. When I officially terminated that lease and walked away from that Lake Lanier villa, I did not just abandon a physical house. I walked away from a lifetime of emotional manipulation and financial exploitation. I took back my power, my resources, and my absolute right to protect my own peace. I looked down at the bustling city streets, the cars moving like tiny rivers of light in the growing dusk. I had successfully transformed their aggressive greed and their blinding arrogance into the ultimate highly profitable weapon. But the true victory was not the money, the legal wins, or the poetic justice of them paying my corporate entity rent every month. The absolute greatest victory was the pristine, uninterrupted quiet I now enjoyed every single day. I was finally completely and permanently free to live a beautiful, elegant life entirely on my own terms, surrounded only by people who genuinely valued and respected me. I had survived their final desperate ambush, turned their own vicious trap against them, and secured my absolute safety. To anyone watching this, who is currently carrying the heavy, suffocating burden of a toxic family, I want to ask you one very important question. When did you finally stop setting yourself on fire to keep your toxic family warm? When did you finally realize that your strength should be used to build your own beautiful life, rather than constantly repairing the deliberate destruction caused by others? Please share your stories of resilience, boundary setting, and survival in the comments below. Let us build a community that celebrates authentic strength and unapologetic independence. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey. Do not forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and always remember to fiercely protect your peace.